Hello and welcome. We're coming to you from NITI Aayog today, and this is a news special. News, as you know, is a new age dissemination curation platform. Today we have amongst us a very eminent personality, a man who wears prominent hats. Professor Bibek Debroy is an eminent economist and author of several books, having authored, edited, and publicized a lot of books on a lot of mythology and economy. He's also a member of India's think tank NITI Aayog and a Padma Shri recipient of 2015. Welcome, Professor Debroy. Thank you for having us, and it's a very proud moment for us, and hopefully our viewers will be able to learn a lot about new topics and about mythology and economy and various social and various aspects which apply to the government of India. So my first question is, I want to talk about your books. One of your biggest works which we have seen is the Mahabharata. You have translated the epic into 10 volumes. Now, I want to start by knowing, how does somebody start a project of this magnitude? Translating the whole of Mahabharata. Do you start by knowing that you'll have 10 volumes, or does it come about in its own process?
Well, there's a background, and the background is, of course, that one fine morning I didn't decide to translate the Mahabharata. I've been translating from Sanskrit into English over a long period of time. It began with the Puranas, then I did the Vedas and the 11 major Upanishads, but those were fundamentally abridged translations, not unabridged. I acquired greater confidence when I did a translation of the Bhagavad Gita, which was published by Penguin, I think in 2005 or 2006. Ever since then, I have been wanting to translate the Mahabharata. The reason I wanted to translate the Mahabharata is contrary to what people think. Unabridged translations of the Mahabharata in English are not that common. What you see are abridged translations, and increasingly there is a generation which is much more comfortable with English than with the vernacular. Unabridged translations of the Mahabharata are only 3, including mine. The other 2 were done in the late 19th century, first by Kishori Mohan Ganguly between 1885 and 1895, and the second one by Manmathanath Datta between 1895 to 1905. They didn't translate everything, but that's not important. I personally think that it is a very negative attitude to criticize Westerners for an inability to understand the nuances of Sanskrit and therefore doing imperfect translations. That's negative and can only be rectified if we do our own translations. So what motivated me was this. The big problem, of course, was that I am not an Indologist. So a legitimate question can be asked, that why is an economist getting into this? But the trouble is, the people who were fluent in Sanskrit, who were Indologists, were not doing it. So there was a vacuum. And what really stood in the way was the sheer size of it, summoning up the energy and the enthusiasm to do it, because as you said, it was 10 volumes. Now that it's been published, it's about 225,000 words of volume, so it's about 2.25 million words. So the sheer size of it was very daunting, particularly because the track record of people who have embarked on unabridged translations of the Mahabharata is not very good. There are at least 3 who died halfway. So someone who's a friend, although people get very upset when I say she's a friend, is Wendy Doniger. So Wendy sent me an email saying, please be careful, you see, the track record is not very good. So that's how it started, and it's now been done. It's now been done, but that's not the end of it, because the Mahabharata is in some sense history. It's over and done with. There is something called the Harivansha, which is not really a proper Purana, but it is regarded, sometimes people call it a Purana, though it's not a proper Purana, which is regarded as an appendix to the Mahabharata. And the way it happens is, by the time Krishna arrives in the Mahabharata, He's an adult. So question is asked, what about his childhood stories? Of course, his childhood stories also figure in the Puranas. So I've done the Harivansha, which has not been published. It will be published in the course of this calendar year, and I've now started on the Valmiki Ramayana.
Oh, okay. Sir, so when you do a work of this magnitude, you become so involved with Mahabharata, because it's been published over a period of a lot of years.
Yeah.
So do you get yourself attached, as in do you find yourself liking a particular character, or what I'm trying to understand is, was there a Parv which was more enjoyable to write and a Parv which was more difficult and more laborious? Did you have that kind of feeling?
Well, actually, you're asking two questions. Firstly, the first question that you asked me, a lot of people ask, and the answer is that I do not have a favorite character anymore, because this is old, cliched. All kinds of people have favorites. Either it's Karna or it is Draupadi. I have been through that earlier. But once you get immersed in the Mahabharata and you're reading it word by word, shloka by shloka, you realize that every individual has a point of view. And you also realize what should be obvious, that an individual is not the same. The Yudhishthira who gambled in Sabha Parva is not the Yudhishthira in Vana Parva. So the characters themselves undergo change, whether it is Yudhishthira, whether it is Draupadi. So I don't have a favorite. So far as the Parvas are concerned, we do know that Veda Vyasa could not have composed all of it. But today it is impossible to separate the different layers. But reading it, the Mahabharata is poetry, so is the Valmiki Ramayana. Reading it, you realize that the quality of the composition is not uniform everywhere. For example, there is a Parva called the Dana Dharma Parva. It is so badly written that it's almost certain that this could not have been part of the original Mahabharata, but as the text stands today, it's there. So there are sections where you think, no, this couldn't have been Veda Vyasa. Let me give you another example. I will quote you a famous shloka. Although that might bore some of your viewers, let me quote a famous shloka. This shloka is from the Bhagavad Gita. It is a famous shloka. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyutthanang adharmasya tadatmanang srajamaham. I don't need to translate it because everyone is familiar with it. We read the Bhagavad Gita from a spiritual point of view, from the point of view of dharma, but the Bhagavad Gita is also Chanda, it is meter, it is poetry. And most of the Bhagavad Gita is in one of the most beautiful meters that exist in Sanskrit called Anushtup. This is the shloka that Valmiki is supposed to have discovered. Let me quote you another shloka, not from the Bhagavad Gita, elsewhere in the Mahabharata. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati parantapa abhyutthanang adharmasya tadatmanang srijamma. Everything is the same, except in one case it is Bharata, in the other case it is Parantapa. There is no significant difference in meaning. The point is, Bharata does not break the meter. Parantapa breaks the meter. So the Parantapa part could not have been written.
Part of the original part.
Yes.
Okay, that's very interesting. That's very, very interesting. Sir, another thing which I loved in your translation is that it was full of footnotes. What was a foot? I mean, as a reader, I think I loved having those footnotes because there was a lot of explanation which I could get. Do you think as a writer it helped you while having those footnotes, or was it just for the reader's purpose?
No. It's like this, that I want to be very careful in whatever I am doing in separating translation from interpretation. I am not doing interpretation, I am doing translation. But in the process of translation, if I just translate, some things will not be very obvious to the reader. So wherever an explanation is necessary, like suddenly I find Rohini is the first nakshatra, and you might say, what is this? How can Rohini be the first nakshatra? The first nakshatra is Ashwini. That needs a footnote. So therefore I have taken care of those kinds of things so that the reader can understand in the footnotes.
Also, do you think the youth of today is in touch with mythology, or is ready to lap up a translation of Mahabharata? That even though that is in 10 volumes, I'm trying to understand your target audience. Do you want the youth to read? Because I think over the years I've realized Mahabharata has a lot to offer to anyone and everyone, from businessman to a student. There is so much to learn for everyone and imbibe. That you think the youth of today should read a translation of Mahabharata? They need to read a translation of Mahabharata?
Well, sort of yes and no. Let me put it like this. The reason the Mahabharata appeals to everyone is the historical context may have changed, a whole lot of things may have changed, but the essential conflict of dharma is something that we confront even today. That's the reason we identify with the Mahabharata. That's also the reason I said that every character has a point of view, and the Mahabharata's position is that there is no absolute right or absolute wrong, because within the template of whatever is dharma, you decide what is your dharma, I decide what is my dharma, and we may, given the same situation, arrive at completely different conclusions and suffer the consequences of the process. So the Mahabharata is much more nuanced than the impression you get from abridged translations where the Kauravas are bad and the Pandavas are good. It's not that. And there is much more in the Mahabharata story than the core Kuru Pandav story. There is a wealth of metaphysical, spiritual discourse. There is a wealth on what we would today call governance. There is a wealth of information which is in the nature of geography, social norms, all of that. Should people read it? Yes. Will it be their first Mahabharata? No way. I refuse to accept that this will ever be the first Mahabharata. This is only for people who are really, really interested. Their first Mahabharata may be Devdutt Patnaik, it may be Rajaji, it may be someone else, doesn't really matter.
Most of those are interpretations, sir. I mean, like, a lot of people are interpreting, Mahabharata from the point of view of Draupadi these days, from the point of view of Karna these days, only, using them as a central character.
Sure. But take something like Rajaji. Rajaji is not interpretation.
Okay,
so in that sense, you see, someone, even Amar Chitra Katha may not really be interpretation.
But not a very good translation.
Fine. But as long as people get interested, I'm not in competition with these things. So as long as people get interested, all I'm concerned with is at some point, there will be someone who doesn't understand Sanskrit, doesn't probably understand even vernacular anymore, so cannot read the Gita press. So here is something that I've done.
Sure when they'll read these detailed works, I think they'll be really, really happy, sir. So, sir, do you think the Indian businesses have a lot to learn from Mahabharata? I think I have seen in the past, few years, a lot of Indian businesses. In India, we do not know how to separate an individual and a company. We somehow take both of them in the same stride, and a lot of Indian businesses do not know the art of exiting out of a company, which in a lot of ways could be similar to how people how Abhimanyu exits out of a Chakravyuh. So you think the Indian businesses maybe have in some ways something to learn?
You see, look, I will give two kinds of responses to that. As I said, there is a wealth of literature on what we can call governance in the Mahabharata, particularly when Bhishma is lying down on his bed of arrows and is instructing Yudhishthira, whether it is in Shanti Parva or whether it is in Anushasana Parva. To give an example, Bhishma tells Yudhishthira, these are the 17 most important civil cases in order of priority that a king must address. Number one, so many thousands of years ago, was breach of contract. Criminal law. A rich person should not be imprisoned for a crime because it is at the cost of the public exchequer. You must always impose a monetary penalty on a rich person. Only the poor person should be imprisoned. This is not the Chicago guys who said it. This is Bhishma. Some people do not realize that the Mahabharata, these sections of the Mahabharata, are richer in detail than Kautilya's Arthashastra. Much more rich. So there is a wealth of information there. When you are talking about the Mahabharata as an individual, there is your own internal self and there is your external relationships with the external world. When you said business, it is largely about relationships with the external world. And yes, people have attempted to correlate that external relationship with what is happening today, whether it is Gurcharan Das in The Difficulty of Being Good, or whether it is Arvind Subramaniam as Chief Economic Advisor. In this year's economic survey, he uses the expression Chakravyuha. But at the end of it all, the Mahabharata is a text about dharma. So it is not about your relationships with the external world, it is about your looking inside and what is inside you. So the thrust of the Mahabharata is that reflecting inwards. The external part is there, but that's not the important part. The Mahabharata is full of at least three of the main schools of philosophy or darshana that we used to have: Sankhya, Yoga and Vedanta. And all of those are about inside, not outside.
Sir, also I'd like to know about another book of yours, Sarama and Her Children. That's the book of dogs, and you're looking how the dogs were treated in ancient India. I love the title of the book and I love the interesting topic. How do you come about with how did your liking for this topic, or how did you thought about writing such a book?
Well, look, I've always loved dogs. That's beside the point. We have dogs at home. That's also beside the point. Sarama, by the way, is the mother of all gods and is also the dog of the gods, both at the same time. So the dog, there are several names for a dog, but a name for a dog is also Saramaya, as descendant of Sarama. So this book is called Sarama and Her Children. The way it happened is, I told you earlier that I had done unabridged translations of the Vedas, Upanishads and Puranas. Today I know that those were bad translations. I would have translated them differently, and remind me about a question that you will ask later about what I will do next, because I want to link it up with that. But the publisher was very happy because these books did well. They still do well. I don't know why. Maybe because there is no substitute. So I had gone to the World Book Fair and the publisher tells me, your Vedas are doing very well, but you did unabridged translations. Now I want you to do an unabridged translations. You've done abridged translations earlier. Now I want you to do an unabridged translation of the Rig Veda with the Sanskrit on one side, the English on the other. I was not very keen on this, but to fend him off, I said, okay, I shall go and let me think about it. Then I began to read the Vedas again carefully with this view in mind. And I found that there is a reference in the Rig Veda to dogs being used as beasts of burden. And I thought, oh wow, I had not noticed this earlier. Watchdogs, one can understand, there were no pet dogs then, but as beasts of burden. Then I found in the Yajurveda there is a shloka mantra which is actually addressed to a dog. I didn't know that either. Then I found in the Ramayana, Valmiki Ramayana, there is a reference that Kaikeyi's household, meaning her father's household, they used to breed dogs in the palace, and those dogs were actually given as gifts at the time of marriage. I said, I didn't know all that. So I just began to collect information on dogs. Wherever they occurred, I don't know enough about Islam, so not Islam, it's essentially Hinduism and Buddhist Jataka tales. I travelled all over to get pictures of dogs. I didn't know earlier that there is a temple to a dog. I'm not saying a Kal Bhairav temple where there is a dog. A temple where a dog is actually worshipped in Dindori in Madhya Pradesh. So I went around taking pictures, etc. Then I had this manuscript. It is the only one of my books or manuscripts that was refused by 14 publishers. Really? 14 publishers said, we don't want this, we don't want to touch this. Then I went to Penguin. No, that's when I first went to Penguin.
Oh, you didn't go to Penguin at all?
Before. So I went to Penguin. Penguin said, of course we'll print this, but we also want a Bhagavad Gita. That's how the Bhagavad Gita happened, because of the dogs in a way. So both of them were published in quick succession. The Bhagavad Gita translation and Sarama and Her Children.
So, sir, what are the future works that we can expect from you in the mythological side?
Well, I already told you I'm doing the Valmiki Ramayana. The Valmiki Ramayana I will complete by the end of this calendar year. It will be published by Penguin next year. You earlier asked me a question about the Mahabharata, which I forgot to answer. Initially, we had thought of 12 volumes, but then the way they were published was sequentially as I went along. So you sort of, if you know that once you have completed it, it's easier to separate it into volumes. But if you are publishing them as you go along, you tend to misjudge the length. So eventually, it ought to have been 11 volumes purely in terms of size, but 11 looks a bit odd, so it became 10, which is why you will find the initial volumes are thinner and the subsequent volumes are thicker. That's the reason it happened. The Valmiki Ramayana can either be 2 volumes or 3 volumes. It's up to you to decide how to sort of divide it once you have finished. However, this is going to be a box set. And Penguin is of the view, which is probably right, that if you have 3 volumes, the volume in the middle tends to get squashed too much. So it's probably better to have 2 thicker volumes rather than 3 thinner volumes. So it's probably going to be, and this is not sequential, all of it is done, and so this should be published next year. But the really mad thing, and mad is not my word, it is my Penguin editor's word, the really mad thing I am doing is, after that I am going to do unabridged translations of the Puranas, the 18 major Puranas. And the reason it is mad is to give you some idea of the magnitude. The 18 major Puranas taken together are 4 times the size of the Mahabharata. So the Mahabharata, let's say, is 10 volumes, so the Puranas, assuming I am alive to complete them, will be 40 volumes.
Oh my God, that's going to be, that's going to be a very, very detailed work. I mean, it's not going to be, it has not been done before.
The Puranas vary widely in length and popularity. The shortest is the Brahma Purana, which is 10,000 shlokas. The longest is the Skanda Purana, which is 85,000 shlokas, about the size of the Mahabharata. Some of those Puranas are popular Puranas. Yeah. Bhagavat Puran, you will find translations. Markandeya Puran, maybe you will find translations. So, odd Puranas have been translated. If you are saying all of them together, all 18, they have not been done. Motilal Banarsi Das started this exercise, which is an ongoing exercise. They have not yet completed it.
And plus, I think a lot of Purans which are popular in people's perception are actually, if you start reading all the Purans, you'll get to know the other Purans which are actually much better, right? Bhagavad Puran is very, very popular in people's perception. A lot of people just read Bhagavad. If somebody has said that I've read Purans, they've only read.
Oh, that's in that sense, yes. They have essentially read even Bhagavad Puran. They've probably not read all of it. They've read the 10th Skandha.
Yes. So I think there is a lot amount of knowledge which is lying in Puran, which people now get to know, because a lot of people don't know how to read the Sanskrit, so they won't even get to it. If there is no translation, they will not even touch it. So there is a lot of wealth of knowledge which, even if somebody like me wants to read, I would never get to it.
That's correct. That's correct. You see, and depending on the Purana, a lot of our normal norms are based on the Puranas. For example, all the Shraddha ceremonies, it's essentially the Garud Purana. The way we construct images, idols in temples, that's the Agni Purana. So the Puranas have influenced us without us not always realizing that that's been the case. For example, Markandeya Puran. Markandeya Puran, very few people probably read all of the Markandeya Puran. They read the part that's called Chandi, which is recited invariably whenever the goddess is worshipped. But on the Puranas, I have another point to make, which is the Puranas by most historians have been dismissed as pure myths. So they have never really been factored into a construction of Indian history. Whether it's the Ramayana or the Mahabharata or the Puranas, the belief is we regard them as itihasa, which means this is indeed what happened. So therefore it's history. For example, if I want to date the Kurukshetra war, astronomical data are very unreliable. They are inconsistent within the same text. One of the ways I can translate, one can date the Kurukshetra war is to use the genealogy that is given in the Puranas. The Puranas give a complete detailed genealogy from the time of accession of Mahapadmananda, which is dated through external sources, to the coronation of Parikshit, which is 36 years after the Kurukshetra war. So you can therefore date the Kurukshetra war more or less reliably on the basis of the genealogy given in the Puranas.
Nice. Also, there was a talk that you were writing a book on West Bengal, maybe?
West Bengal? No, not West Bengal. Okay. You see, West Bengal, it was not a book, it was a monograph. Okay. That was done before the Trinamool came to power. I did that with Lavish Bhandari, which was a catalogue of how West Bengal stood against other states. It was not done for the Trinamool, but was extensively used by the Trinamool in the campaign. It was published both in English and Bengali, but the Bengali version, the left front government sort of banned it in a sense. No, but I have done books on the states. I have done a book on, I have done 2 books on Gujarat. Yeah. I have done one on Meghalaya. Yeah. I have done, but those have not yet been published, one on Chhattisgarh and one on Madhya Pradesh. They are due to be published fairly soon because I have always been interested in that. Jharkhand, no, because you want to do, not yet. Jharkhand, you see, the Chief Minister has set up a committee to recommend a development plan for Jharkhand. So I was chairman of that. So I did a report on Jharkhand, but not a book on Jharkhand.